What would you do if you were backed into a corner, surrounded by accusations and slander, with someone holding the power of life and death staring you down, waiting for an explanation? Typically, we might fight back, offer a defense, or cry out in protest. Yet, one man chose a response that left the most powerful Roman governor of the time astonished and rendered powerless. Not through a forceful defense, but through a profound, unsettling silence. This was not the silence of the weak or the defeated. This is the story of the powerful silences of Jesus during the most pivotal moments of his life, and the profound lesson within them that the modern world has inadvertently forgotten. There is a moment in the trial of Jesus where the Roman governor stares at the prisoner in front of him and cannot speak. Not because he has nothing to say. Pontius Pilate always has something to say. He is a Roman prefect, a career administrator, a man whose job is to manage difficult people in a difficult province and extract from every situation exactly the outcome Rome requires. He has questioned hundreds of prisoners. He knows how this goes. You press, they talk. They always talk. But this prisoner will not speak. The chief priests and elders are piling accusation on accusation. The room is loud with charges, and Jesus stands in the middle of it and says nothing. Not a defense, not a denial, not even a single word to a single charge. And the text says something that should stop you. It says, Pilate marveled. The Greek word is ethomazin. It is the same word used when crowds watched Jesus heal the sick and raise the dead. The governor, who had never met a prisoner he could not break, stares at a man choosing silence and is astonished. We will get there. But I need you to understand something first, because this is not the only silence. It is not even close to the only one. In the hours between Gethsemane and Golgotha, Jesus encounters 5 people who demand something from him: a performance, a confession, a defense, a rebuke, an explanation. And in almost every case, he gives them nothing. Not because he has nothing to say, because he knows exactly which questions deserve an answer and which ones do not. This is the story of the silences of Jesus and what they cost him and what they were trying to show us. It is night in the garden. Torches are moving through the trees. A crowd of soldiers and officials sent from the chief priests and Pharisees carrying weapons. And at the front of that crowd, as the signal, as the arrangement, is a man who has eaten at the same table as Jesus for 3 years. A man who watched the feeding of the 5,000 and the raising of Lazarus and the Sermon on the Mount. A man whose feet Jesus washed earlier that same evening. His name is Judas. He steps forward and greets Jesus with a kiss. In first century Jewish culture, a kiss on the cheek was a standard greeting between a rabbi and his disciple. Warm, intimate, a gesture of belonging and affection. Judas has taken that gesture and turned it into a transaction. The kiss that says, I am yours, now means take him. Jesus looks at him. And here is where most people expect an explosion. 3 years of shared life. 3 years of watching this man move through crowds and heal the sick and speak words that no one had ever spoken. And now, a kiss that means chains. Surely this is the moment for something raw. Grief, accusation, the full weight of what betrayal costs when it comes from someone you chose. What Jesus says is one word. The Greek is heteros. Your English Bible probably translates it as friend, and it is a word for friend, but it is not the warmest word for friend. The word for deep, beloved friendship in Greek is philos. The word used when John describes himself as the disciple Jesus loved. The word used when Jesus talks about laying down one's life for one's friends. Heteros is something cooler. more formal. It is the word a landowner uses to address a worker in a parable. It acknowledges relationship without trading on it. Jesus does not say, "How could you?" He does not say, "Do you know what you have done?" He does not say, "I gave you everything." He says one word, companion, and then five more. Do what you came to do. That is the last thing Jesus ever says to Judas, not an appeal to their history, not a final attempt to change Judas's mind, not a rebuke that would have handed Judas's worst moment back to him as a weapon. One word that names the relationship without weaponizing it, and five words that release Judas to his choice without shaming him into a different one. Stay with me, because what Jesus refuses to say here matters as much as what he says. In that garden, in that moment, Jesus has more leverage over Judas than Judas has over him. He knows what Judas has done. He could have exposed it. He could have named it in front of the disciples, in front of the soldiers, in front of everyone. He could have made Judas's betrayal the headline of that evening in a way Judas could never have recovered from. He does not. One word, five words, and silence. The silence that refuses to use a person's worst moment as a weapon is one of the hardest silences in the world to maintain. And Jesus maintains it in a garden at night while his hands are being bound. But Judas is not the only one. A few hours later, in the courtyard of the high priest's house, there is a charcoal fire. It is cold enough that people have gathered around it for warmth. Servants, officials, the people who have nowhere better to be at this hour. And among them, trying to look like he belongs, is Peter. Peter, who 2 hours ago told Jesus that even if everyone else fell away, he would not. Peter, who drew a sword in the garden and cut off a man's ear before Jesus told him to put it away. Peter, whose courage in the garden evaporated the moment the soldiers took Jesus away, who has been following at a distance, who is now standing at a fire in the courtyard of the place where Jesus is being tried, hoping nobody notices. 3 times someone recognizes him. 3 times Peter says the same thing. I do not know him. I do not know what you are talking about. I am not one of his disciples. The 3rd time, the rooster crows. Luke records what happens next in a single sentence that is almost unbearable in its simplicity. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Across the firelight, across the crowd, across the sound of a rooster and the echo of 3 denials, he turns and finds Peter's face. And he says nothing. No words, no accusation, no, I told you so. Because he did tell him at the supper table, and Peter did not believe him. No reference to the sword in the garden, or the bravado at the table, or the 3 years of following that have come to this courtyard and this fire and this denial. Just a look. Peter goes outside and weeps bitterly. Here is what most people miss about that moment. If Jesus had spoken, if he had said anything, even something gentle, even something forgiving, Peter could have argued with it, could have defended himself, explained himself, minimized what had just happened. Words give people something to push against, but a look that sees you completely, that holds your worst moment without flinching, that does not look away. A look like that has nowhere to hide from. The silence breaks Peter open in a way that no accusation could have. Because Peter does not weep because Jesus condemned him. He weeps because Jesus looked at him with the same eyes he had always used, and Peter knew in an instant what those eyes contained. Not fury, not disappointment that ends things, something far harder to bear than either of those. Love that has seen everything and has not looked away. There is a king in Jerusalem who has wanted to meet Jesus for a long time. His name is Herod Antipas. He is the son of Herod the Great, the one who tried to kill Jesus at birth, who slaughtered the children of Bethlehem, looking for a toddler he was afraid of. The son did not inherit his father's paranoia, but he inherited something arguably worse: curiosity without conviction, interest without commitment, the desire to be entertained by things he has no intention of being changed by. Luke tells us that Herod had heard about Jesus for years. Reports had been reaching him: miraculous healings, crowds in the thousands, a teacher who said things nobody had said before. And somewhere along the way, Herod had developed a theory. Luke 9 records him saying, after he had beheaded John the Baptist, "John I beheaded, but who is this man about whom I hear such things?" And Luke adds that Herod was trying to see Jesus. He wanted a look. He wanted to see what the fuss was about. Now, in the middle of the night, Jesus is brought before him. Luke records Herod's reaction with a word that lands wrong once you understand what is happening. He was delighted. Herod Antipas, standing in his palace in the middle of a night, moving toward the crucifixion of an innocent man, is delighted because he has been wanting to see Jesus for a long time, and he hoped to see him perform a sign, a miracle, something impressive, something worth the wait. He is not looking for truth. He is not looking for salvation. He is looking for a show, and Jesus looks at him and says nothing, not one word. Luke is specific about this. The chief priests and scribes are standing there, accusing Jesus violently, and Jesus answers none of it. Herod asks questions. Jesus does not answer. The accusations pile up. Jesus does not respond. Not a defense, not a denial, not a single syllable directed at Herod Antipas or anything he says or anything said about him. Pay attention to what this costs. Silence before Herod is not the safe choice. Herod has already demonstrated what he does with people who inconvenience him. John the Baptist's head arrived on a platter because John told Herod the truth about his marriage, and Herod found it uncomfortable. Jesus knows this, and Jesus stands before the man who killed his cousin, and the man who wants a miracle, and the man whose cooperation might soften what is coming, and he gives him nothing. Because Herod does not want the truth. He wants a performance, and Jesus will not perform. The Mishnah, the collected wisdom of the rabbis compiled in the 2nd century, records a teaching from Shimon ben Gamliel in the Tractate Avot. All my days I have grown up among the wise, and I have found nothing better for a person than silence. The rabbis understood something about the relationship between wisdom and restraint. Not every question deserves the dignity of an answer. Not every demand deserves the respect of a response. Sometimes the most powerful thing a wise person can do is simply refuse to speak. Jesus does not perform for Herod, so Herod does what people do when they cannot get what they want from someone they cannot control. He mocks him. He and his soldiers treat Jesus with contempt, dress him in an elegant robe as a joke. The king who will not perform gets costumed as one anyway, and send him back to Pilate. And then Luke records the detail I mentioned earlier. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other, for before this they had been enemies. The silence of Jesus, which cost him Herod's contempt and his soldiers' mockery, accidentally reconciled two men who had been enemies. He brought peace between them without saying a word, at his own expense. Now we arrive at the moment I told you about at the beginning. The Praetorium, Pontius Pilate, the most powerful Roman official in Judea, responsible for keeping order in one of the most volatile provinces in the empire. A man who has spent his career reading people, extracting information, managing situations, a pragmatist, a politician, a man who has seen everything a difficult province can produce and is not easily surprised. The chief priests and elders are bringing charge after charge. The accusations are coming fast, and they are serious. Sedition, blasphemy, claiming to be a king. Any one of these, if answered poorly, could accelerate things toward the cross. And Pilate is watching, and Pilate is experienced, and Pilate knows that a smart prisoner would be talking right now. He leans toward Jesus. Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you? Matthew 27:14. And this is the verse I want you to sit with. But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge. Not even to a single charge. The Greek underneath that sentence is precise. Every accusation received the same response, the same deliberate, chosen, unbroken quiet. And then Matthew records Pilate's reaction with a word that should reframe everything you think you know about what is happening in that room. Athamazin, he marveled. He was astonished. The same word used when crowds watched Jesus open blind eyes and still storms and raise the dead. The miracles of Jesus produced athamazin. And now, in a room where no miracle is happening, where the most powerful man in the region is watching a prisoner refuse to defend himself against charges that could kill him, the same word appears. The silence of Jesus is being described with the same vocabulary as his miracles. This is not a coincidence. 700 years before this moment, the prophet Isaiah wrote about a servant who would come, suffering, disfigured, despised, rejected. And in Isaiah 53, verse 7, he wrote these words: He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. The silence before Pilate was not improvised. It was not the response of a man who had run out of things to say, not a man who had given up, not a man who had decided the situation was hopeless. It was the living, breathing, real-time fulfillment of a prophecy written 7 centuries earlier. Every word Isaiah wrote about the servant's silence is being acted out word by word in a Roman courtroom at the beginning of the 1st century. The silence is not weakness. It is prophecy becoming flesh. And here's what that means. Pilate is not watching a man who has nothing to say. He is watching a man who has already said everything through 3 years of teaching and healing and raising the dead and sitting with the excluded, and who has now arrived at the moment where words would only be used against him, and who has chosen, with complete awareness of what that choice will cost, to be silent. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing from a prison cell in Nazi Germany while awaiting execution, reflected on the silence of Jesus before his accusers and said something that has stayed with the church ever since. The silence of Christ before his accusers was not the silence of cowardice or defeat. It was the silence of one who had already spoken everything worth saying, and who now entrusted the outcome to the only court whose verdict actually mattered. Pilate cannot understand what he is seeing, because what he is seeing is not a prisoner calculating his options. It is a man who is completely, serenely, devastatingly free. Free from the need to defend himself. Free from the need to perform. Free from the need to manage Pilate's impression or leverage Pilate's sympathy or find the right combination of words to make this go differently. He is the only free man in that room, and Pilate marvels at him. Now watch the pattern that is forming. Herod wanted a performance. Jesus gave him silence. Pilate wanted a defense. Jesus gave him silence. Judas wanted some emotional response that would make the betrayal feel more significant. Jesus gave him one word and five more and nothing else. Peter wanted. He did not know what he wanted in that courtyard. He got a look that broke him open without breaking him apart. The silence of Jesus is not random. It is not passivity. It is not the absence of something. It is precision. He withholds his words from the people who want to use them. He gives his silence to those who would weaponize his speech. And he reserves his words, as we are about to see, for the single moment when speaking the truth is the only thing left that matters. But that moment has not come yet. There is one more room, one more question. And what Jesus says there, after everything he has refused to say, will be the most important sentence he speaks between Gethsemane and Golgotha. The house of Caiaphas is full of people who should not be there. The Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish court, the 71 elders who held religious and legal authority over the Jewish people, has been assembled in the middle of the night. This is already illegal. Jewish law required that capital trials be held during the day. It required that a verdict of death could not be reached on the same day as the trial. There had to be a night between the hearing and the decision, a night for mercy to work on the judges. It required two witnesses whose testimonies agreed precisely before any charge could stand. None of these rules are being followed tonight. Witnesses are being brought in one after another, and their stories do not match. Mark records it with unusual bluntness. Many testified falsely against Jesus, but their testimonies did not agree. The court that is supposed to be the guardian of the law is breaking the law to remove the man who came to fulfill it. And through all of it, through witness after witness, through testimony after testimony, through the grinding illegal machinery of a verdict that has already been decided, Jesus says nothing. Caiaphas is watching. He is the high priest. He has held the position for nearly 2 decades, an unusually long tenure, the result of being useful to Rome and careful with power. He is not a man who loses control of rooms. He is not a man who is surprised by situations. And he is looking at a prisoner who has said nothing through an entire parade of accusers, and he cannot stand it. He stands up. Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? Silence. The high priest of Israel, standing in his own house, in the middle of his own court, surrounded by his own officials. And the prisoner looks at him and says nothing. Not a denial, not a defense, not even the acknowledgement that a question has been asked. And then Caiaphas does something that changes everything. He puts Jesus under oath. I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. This is the most solemn legal formula available in Jewish law. To place someone under oath by the living God was to invoke the highest possible authority, the name so sacred that Jews would not speak it aloud, the name that scribes would stop and wash their hands before writing, the name above every name. You did not invoke it lightly. And once invoked, a righteous person could not remain silent. To stay silent under oath by the living God was itself a form of testimony. Caiaphas has found the one door through the silence, and Jesus walks through it. You have said so, but I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The room tears open. Caiaphas rips his clothes, the traditional gesture of mourning in response to blasphemy. He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? The court that could not get its false witnesses to agree now has what it needs from the defendant himself, spoken under oath in front of everyone. He has answered fully, completely, without qualification or hedging or the careful diplomatic language you might expect from a man who knows what this answer will cost him. He does not say perhaps, or some say, or it depends on what you mean. He says, from now on, you will see the Son of Man at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds. The language of Daniel 7, the Ancient of Days, the one like a Son of Man receiving dominion and glory and an everlasting kingdom. Caiaphas asked if he was the Messiah. Jesus answered with the entire weight of prophetic scripture behind a single yes. Now, watch what the silence has been doing all along. He was silent before Herod because Herod wanted a miracle, a performance, a sign, something to be entertained by. Jesus will not be entertainment. He was silent before Pilate because Pilate wanted a defense, words he could use to manage the situation politically. Jesus will not be a political tool. He was silent before false witnesses because false witnesses wanted ammunition, something to quote, something to twist. Jesus will not hand his words to liars. He gave Judas one word in silence because Judas needed release, not rebuke. And a rebuke would have been about Jesus' pain, not Judas' soul. He gave Peter a look in silence because Peter needed to be broken open, not broken apart. And words would have given Peter something to argue with instead of something to weep over. 5 silences, 5 different reasons, 5 moments where the most powerful thing in the room was what Jesus refused to say. And then Caiaphas asked under oath about the one thing Jesus will never be silent about, who he is. He is silent about his rights, silent about his pain, silent about the injustice, the illegal assembly, the contradicting witnesses, the political maneuvering that has brought him to this room at this hour. All of that, silence. But his identity, the question of whether he is the Son of God, he answers that one every time, without hesitation, without the slightest concern for what the answer will cost him. And in that room, with torn robes and a verdict of death already forming, the answer cost him everything. Augustine, reflecting on the trial of Jesus, said something the church has returned to in every generation of suffering since. The one who could have called 10,000 angels chose instead to answer one question under oath and say nothing to everything else, because the truth about who he was mattered more than the comfort of what he could have avoided. He spoke when it mattered most. He was silent about everything else. There are 3 things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: silence can be the most powerful answer in the room. Jesus stood before Herod and Pilate, the 2 most powerful men in his world, men who commanded armies and decided life and death, and he stopped them both with silence. Pilate marveled. Herod was reduced to mockery because he had nothing else to do with a man who refused to perform. You live in a world that will constantly demand that you explain yourself, defend yourself, justify yourself. The discipline of Jesus suggests that not every demand deserves the dignity of a response. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to speak. The second is this: he refused to use people's worst moments as weapons. Judas got one word and release. Peter got a look that loved him without leveraging him. Jesus had more ammunition against both of them than either of them had against him, and he used none of it. He held both of their worst moments in his hands and gave them back something that was not a weapon. That is a discipline more difficult than any silence. And it is the discipline he practiced in the hardest hours of his life. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with, he was never silent about who he was. Through everything, through the garden and the courtyard and Herod's contempt and Pilate's amazement and the illegal assembly and the false witnesses and the torn robes, there is one thing Jesus never withholds, one thing he never hedges, one thing he never softens or qualifies or makes easier for the room to accept: the truth about himself. And the truth about himself is the truth that matters to you too. Because what he claims in that room, under oath, at the cost of his life, in the darkest hour of the darkest night, is not only that he is the Son of God, it is that the Son of God came, walked into the world, sat at wells, and touched lepers, and wept at tombs, and washed feet, and stood silent before kings, and was willing to say so out loud, under oath, in a room full of people who were going to kill him for it. Word by word, moment by moment, he chose every silence, and he chose the one answer with complete awareness of what each cost. Which means that the God who stood silent before Herod and Pilate and Judas and the court that condemned him, the God who refused to perform, refused to defend, refused to weaponize, refused to explain, is not silent about the thing that matters most to you. He spoke it under oath, in the worst room, at the worst hour, when it cost him everything. He still speaks it now. Whatever room you are in, whatever feels like it is being decided about you without your voice, whatever accusations are piling up, whatever verdicts feel like they are being reached by people who have already made up their minds, the same Jesus who stood in Caiaphas' house and answered the only question that mattered is the same Jesus who speaks into your situation today. Not with performance, not with leverage, not with the weapons your worst moments handed him, with the truth about who he is and who he says you are. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, "He still speaks." Just that. And if you know someone in a room right now where verdicts are being reached and voices are being ignored, share this with them. Because the same man who silenced a Roman governor with silence and answered a high priest with everything spoke the truth when it cost him most. And he has not stopped speaking it since. We will see you in the next one.